Welcome to my channel! Today we are traveling back in time to explore the Cradle of Civilization. Long before the pyramids of Egypt or the empires of Rome, there was a land between two rivers where civilization began. This is the story of Mesopotamia, the birthplace of writing, law, and cities. Our story begins over 6,000 years ago in the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Back then, life was tough. There were no stores to buy food or cars to ride in. But there was plenty of work to be done. The people of Mesopotamia grew crops, raised animals, and built houses. And as they worked, they noticed patterns in nature. They saw the sun rise and set, the seasons change, and the rivers flow. They learned to predict these patterns and use them to their advantage. For example, they planted crops when the river flooded and the soil was rich with fertilizer. They also developed tools to help them work more efficiently. They invented the wheel, the plow, and many other devices that made life easier. But perhaps the most important invention of all was writing. At first, people kept track of things by counting on their fingers. But as trade became more complicated, they needed something more sophisticated. So, the Sumerians invented a way to press wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets. This new system of writing was called cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped. With this invention, people could record information, tell stories, and keep track of their belongings. They used it to write down everything from shopping lists to love poems. One of the most famous pieces of Sumerian literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It tells the story of a mighty king who goes on a dangerous quest. The epic is considered the oldest known work of literature in the world. These early Mesopotamian innovations laid the groundwork for future civilizations. Writing allowed people to share ideas and knowledge across long distances. Tools made life easier, and math helped them understand the world around them. As the centuries passed, Mesopotamia continued to thrive. New empires rose and fell, but each one built on the achievements of those who came before. Next, we'll meet the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, and finally, Let's jump back into our time machine and see what adventures await us in ancient Mesopotamia. Now, let's fast forward to 2334 BC. The Sumerians had been ruling over the city of Akkad for several centuries. But now, a new empire was on the rise. Led by the mighty King Sargon, the Akkadians were a fierce bunch who weren't afraid of anything. They had a powerful army and a strong economy. In fact, under Sargon's rule, Akkad became the largest empire the world had ever seen. He boasted, "By my command, the four corners of the earth were made secure, and the borders of the world were established." Sargon's empire lasted for several generations, but eventually it collapsed. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and other groups fought over control of the land. In the end, the Sumerians won and once again took control of southern Mesopotamia. However, their victory was short-lived. Not long after, a new empire rose in Babylon. By 1792 BC, the Babylonians were at the height of their power. They had a strong military, a thriving economy, and a beautiful capital city. But perhaps the most famous Babylonian ruler was King Hammurabi. He was the king of Babylon from 1792 to 1750 BC, and he is best known for his code of laws. The Code of Hammurabi was one of the first legal systems in history. It covered everything from business contracts to family law. The code was written in stone and placed in public areas so everyone could see it. One of the most famous laws in the code was an eye for an eye. This meant that if someone did something bad to another person, they would receive the same punishment. While some of the laws may seem harsh by today's standards, they were actually quite progressive for the time. For example, the code protected the rights of women and children. Overall, the Babylonian Empire was a golden age in Mesopotamia. The economy was booming, the arts were flourishing, and the people were living in relative peace. However, as with all empires, it eventually collapsed. The Babylonians were defeated by the Hittites in 1595 BC, but their legacy lived on in their code of laws and other achievements. Now let's jump ahead to 900 BC. The Assyrians were a warlike people who lived in northern Mesopotamia. They had a strong military and a love of violence. The Assyrians used their military might to conquer much of Mesopotamia and the surrounding regions. They also developed new weapons and tactics, including the use of iron weapons and siege towers. Siege towers were large structures that were used to attack cities. They had soldiers at the top who could shoot arrows or throw stones into the city. The Assyrians also used chariots and cavalry to great effect. Chariots were horse-drawn vehicles that were used for transportation and warfare. Cavalry were soldiers who fought on horseback. Together, these military innovations made the Assyrians a formidable fighting force. They were able to conquer vast amounts of territory and hold it for many years. However, the Assyrian Empire was not without its flaws. The Assyrians were known for their brutality and cruelty. They often killed or enslaved the people they conquered. This behavior ultimately led to their downfall. The Assyrians were overthrown by the Babylonians in 609 BC. But their military achievements continued to be celebrated for centuries. In fact, the Assyrians are considered to be one of the greatest fighting forces in ancient history. We've explored the ups and downs of 3 great Mesopotamian empires, each one leaving its own unique mark on history. But what really sets Mesopotamia apart is the lasting impact it had on the world. In fact, many of the things we take for granted today can be traced back to this ancient land, so let's take a moment to appreciate the ways that Mesopotamia shaped our world. First, let's talk about math. The Babylonians were known for their advanced understanding of mathematics. They developed the concept of zero and developed a system of numbers that was used for centuries. They also made significant advances in geometry and algebra. In fact, the Babylonians were so good at math that they were able to calculate the value of pi to 6 decimal places. But that's not all. The Babylonians also made significant advances in agriculture. They developed new methods of irrigation that allowed them to water their crops more efficiently. They also introduced new crops to the region, such as grapes and olives. Thanks to these innovations, the Babylonians were able to feed a growing population and build one of the largest empires in history. The Mesopotamians were also major players in the world of religion and mythology. They believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses who controlled everything from the weather to the fate of humans. Some of their gods were kind and benevolent, while others were cruel and capricious. But perhaps the most famous Mesopotamian deity was Ishtar. She was the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. Ishtar was also associated with the planet Venus, which the Mesopotamians believed was a chariot driven by the goddess across the sky. The worship of Ishtar spread to other cultures, including the Assyrians and Babylonians. Her influence can also be seen in later religions, such as Christianity and Islam. But perhaps the most important legacy of Mesopotamia is its contribution to writing. The Sumerians invented one of the earliest known writing systems in history. They developed cuneiform, a system of writing that used wedge-shaped marks to represent words and sounds. This invention allowed the Mesopotamians to keep records, tell stories, and communicate over long distances. In fact, many of the world's oldest pieces of literature come from Mesopotamia. The Epic of Gilgamesh is just one example. It tells the story of a legendary king who goes on a quest for immortality. Other Mesopotamian texts include hymns, prayers, and myths. They provide valuable insights into the beliefs and customs of this ancient culture. In conclusion, Mesopotamia's contributions to math, agriculture, religion, and writing are just a few of the ways that it shaped our world. It's a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the people who lived in this ancient land. But what do you think? What's the most interesting thing about Mesopotamia? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about ancient history, stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching. It is hard to believe that all these amazing discoveries and inventions came from a place that is now called Iraq. If you travel there today, you'll see the ruins of ancient cities like Babylon, and you can also visit the British Museum in London or the Louvre Museum in Paris to see artifacts from Mesopotamia. But if you really want to experience Mesopotamia, you need to use your imagination. Picture yourself walking through the bustling streets of Babylon, watching a group of Sumerian priests perform a ritual, or listening to a scribe read the Epic of Gilgamesh. With a little imagination, you can feel like you've stepped back in time and are exploring the Cradle of Civilization for yourself. That's the end of our journey through time to ancient Mesopotamia. We hope you've enjoyed learning about this amazing place and all its contributions to our world. Now, it's your turn to keep the adventure going. Which empire fascinated you the most? the mighty Assyrians, the innovative Sumerians, or the law-abiding Babylonians? Share your thoughts below and do you on. Forget to hit that like button if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey through Mesopotamia. And until next time, keep exploring the past.